This week, the federal government has pledged to crack down on auto thefts. Step one is bringing together provincial, municipal, and policing counterparts. Now, car thefts have surged over the past few years, with the Insurance Bureau of Canada calling it a crisis, adding it's costing $1 billion annually. Well, yesterday, the feds announced an additional $23 billion for the Canadian Border Services Agency to patrol ports. Today, the Prime Minister suggested tougher penalties for thieves, while Industry Minister Philippe Champagne discussed cracking down on tech used to steal vehicles. The national database on stolen cars will be linked to Interpol's database, and that should help RCMP track down stolen cars. However, today's meetings ended without any further concrete announcements. So how far is the government willing to go? Well, joining me right now to answer that question is Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Good evening, Mike.
First of all, you called this summit to understand this growing problem, but you've had mayors in major cities telling you that it's a major problem. So how soon do you feel that you need, or how much time do you need to actually make a dent in this?
So we've already been working on this issue over the last number of months, and in fact over the last number of years. But we share the concern of Canadians around the alarming increase in the number of vehicle thefts and the increasingly violent context around some of these thefts, carjackings, people using weapons to steal cars. So that concern has certainly, as you say, been shared with us by mayors, by provincial ministers. We've already, as I noted, done a lot. I was in Toronto last week with Premier Ford and the GTA, announced additional funding for provincial and municipal police. Yesterday, I announced enhanced funding for the Border Services Agency. I'm going to have more to say in the next couple of weeks around money that the RCMP and their policing partners can use with organizations like Interpol. But at the end of the day, Mike, the only way we're going to be able to put a dent in quickly what is increasingly a violent and very worrisome context for thousands of people is to work with local police, with provincial governments, with municipal police. The RCMP and the Border Services Agency, for which I have responsibility, need those partnerships and those companions to really make a dent in this. But today you had all of the participants in a constructive way saying they want to do more very quickly. So your question of how long will it take? Not long at all. In my view, we're going to bring in regulations around banning the import of some of these devices used to copy electronic keys. So everybody's going to do everything they can as quickly as they can. So I'm very encouraged by what we heard from provincial, municipal partners today.
What does quickly mean for you, though?
Not quickly enough for the people who are having their cars stolen.
And that's why I ask it.
Totally. So we're going to be moving forward. As I say, we've already announced last week, again yesterday, and in the coming weeks, increased funding that police services and border services tell me they can immediately deploy on things like scanners in ports, additional border services agents. But municipal and provincial police services also want to do this work quickly. We're going to provide some additional federal funding, but I was encouraged by what ministers from Quebec and Ontario, mayors from cities like Brampton and Montreal and Laval in Quebec, were saying that they're all prepared to do more. We said we'd look at changing legislation and regulations, the criminal code or regulations, if it can be done quickly. I'm sensing a desire to move as fast as we can.
But how much time do you think it will take to get everything going? Because buying those scanners that you said you're going to do, training up the people to actually work those scanners, that doesn't happen tomorrow, next week, or even next month. So what is a reasonable time frame for people to expect actual action here?
Well, some of it can happen next month. Some of it can happen next week if the Border Services Agency is increasing its capacity on criminal intelligence, working with local police forces.
But is that where it is? Because I think a lot of people look at the scanners, and just to be clear, that $28 million, the 28 that you've announced is over 3 years. So is that really enough?
Well, so look, people are focusing on scanners and the Border Services Agency because understandably a great deal of these stolen vehicles are exported through the Port of Montreal, but yet not uniquely the Port of Montreal. 40% of the stolen cars are resold in Canada.
True.
So therefore, local and provincial police, and in the case of the RCMP, in terms of criminal organizations, transnational criminal groups, have a lot of work to do. We think the most effective way for the Border Services Agency to do their part at the ports is to have criminal intelligence from local and provincial police and the RCMP to know exactly what containers need to be interdicted and opened. The idea that you can scan every single container leaving the Port of Montreal, Mr. Poilievre makes it up. So he says we're going to scan every single container leaving the port. Technologically and in terms of human resources, it's impossible, and it would have a massive impact on global supply chains and our reputation as an exporting country.
So does that mean that it will still be somewhat porous if you can't check every one of them?
Well, somewhat porous. It's going to be a lot more effective and a lot tighter in terms of the Border Services ability to scan containers, to use criminal intelligence with local partners to interdict the exporting of these vehicles. These vehicles aren't stolen at the Port of Montreal.
No, but that's where they're exiting, and that's where people also can't get them, right? That's the other thing.
But
some people can track them. With all due respect, some people can track them, and there have been documented cases of people who have air tags, and that is something that some police forces have said, oh, well, maybe outfit your car with air tags and other things. Some people have those. They know where they are, and the jurisdictional issues mean that nobody can get to that container. So what's the work being done there?
Well, that's unacceptable. And we heard about that today from the CEO of the Port of Montreal and the Border Services. That is something that we want to address very quickly. But again, the best thing we can do is prevent those vehicles from being stolen in cities across the country, interdict the people and the organized criminals that are stealing these vehicles, arrest the people and hold them to account, prosecute them in the communities where the vehicles are being stolen. So we need to do all of this at the same time. And that's why the Ontario Solicitor General, the Minister of Public Safety from Quebec, and their senior police leadership are all telling us, look, we want to work collaboratively and in a more effective way quickly with you in those communities. That's also got to be part of the solution. And I'm very encouraged by what we heard today and their desire to do that work with us.
Your Justice Minister has pointed to C-75 and said that you're working on changes to improve penalties or to strengthen penalties for people who steal cars. One of the things he mentioned is that sentences would go from 18 months to 2 years less a day. That's a difference of 5 months. Do you think that really affects anybody who is willing to steal a car?
Well, and there can be more serious penalties, obviously, for those that are doing this as part of an organized criminal activity, an organized criminal gang, or those that would use weapons or violence in the pursuit of a vehicle theft. So the penalties go up from that. Sure, tough sentencing regimes and tough criminal code provisions are absolutely part of the answer, and we're prepared to look at those. But that alone won't be a sufficient deterrent. We need to have local police, regional, municipal, or provincial police working on this with the RCMP and Border Services. That's the most effective way to hold these people to account, is to detect and arrest the people stealing the cars, and then, of course, prosecute them. And those that are part of a violent criminal gang or are members of a criminal enterprise that are using these revenues, it's one of the alarming things we heard today. They're using this revenue for, in many cases, gun smuggling, human trafficking. So that sort of behooves all of us to do this work very quickly.
To that end, you had RCMP Commissioner Michael Duhaime calling for a special designation for organized crime to treat them almost like a terrorist group. Is that something that your government wants to do?
We've toughened the penalties around organized criminal gangs. In the case of terrorist groups, as you know, there's a criminal code provision which allows us to list terrorist organizations. But I talk to the commissioner many times a week. Obviously, his suggestions around ways that we can strengthen the criminal code will be very, very much part of our work.
Because he says that it'll give them extra powers to actually track them down.
So there's a thoughtful, positive suggestion of a senior law enforcement official that the government will look at very quickly.
And would you move forward on that?
Again, the Justice Minister will look at these criminal code changes. I can't commit the Minister of Justice to precise criminal code changes tonight, but I can tell you that that's an example of a thoughtful suggestion from a police leader who has direct experience with partners all across the country in the kind of instruments that would be helpful.
I just want to ask you in closing here, there are Canadians at home that go to bed and just before they do, they check their driveways. First thing in the morning, they check their driveways again because they're so concerned about this. What do you say to them right now after holding a summit where everybody was there and they look at this and go, I don't know what's changing tomorrow and nothing makes me feel safer about leaving my car in the driveway tonight?
So I think we'd start by saying we understand that very reasonable concern, and we think it's as unacceptable as other Canadians do. People shouldn't have to do that, and you've identified a very real circumstance. But coming out of today's meeting, we will double down on the efforts with partners in the cities where these people are going to sleep tonight to make sure that the car that they put in their driveway, they leave in their driveway, is safe from organized criminal gangs that will seek to steal that car and use that revenue for more violent organized criminal activity. They need to know that we're investing more in RCMP, border services officers. If they're in a city in the province of Ontario, we were there last week with 121 million additional dollars, the Premier of Ontario.
And that help is coming quickly? I mean, can they...
That money's available right now. So the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, the Police Chief in Toronto, Peel Regional Police Chief, the York Regional Police Chief, we're all at the meeting today. That money is available right now at the province of Ontario. It's federal money that we gave to the province. They can hire new officers. They can buy new equipment.
Right.
They can expand some of the joint task forces that include, for example, border services and the RCMP. The RCMP are embedded in many of these regional police operations now, but we're prepared to do more very quickly.
Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate this.
Thank you, Mike. Have a great evening.
You too.